So the past couple of years have not strengthened my faith in humanity, and it became even less strong after watching the new Netflix documentary series Web of Make-Believe: Death, Lies, and the Internet. I am ready for the torches and pitchforks. You coming along? This six-part anthology series tells stories of people caught in a dark and twisted web of modern misinformation and digital deception. Haunting and bizarre, this looks at how reality is warped when the ordinary American household collides with a chaotic web of misinformation. This follows 5 different cases, with the final case spanning 2 episodes. After watching the first 4, I had just about had enough of people. Now, this series covers topics like swatting, which is something I'd never heard of. There's a case of sextortion. We dive into the horrifying and delusional world of white supremacy. Plus, we take a look at Russian election interference and also an IRS scheme that's pretty impressive. Now, each of the episodes is around an hour long, so to binge through the whole thing at once is going to take a bit of your day, and then maybe part of your soul. The first case that's examined is about swatting, which is basically sending the police, fire, and hopefully SWAT team to pounce on the house of somebody that you find to be your rival. Now, I'd never heard of this before, but to hear the accounts of those involved made my blood boil. Much of the time, these instances came about because of some sexually frustrated keyboard warrior gamer who got his panties in a bunch because he lost an online game. And as despicable as the actions are, it also shines a light on a much more important and then dangerous tactic, that police would just act. And I'm not talking about responding, but actually acting on the perceived threat without any actual foundation that it's real. Sure, you get the call, it sounds legit, you roll out to protect the citizens. But just before barging in and shooting, assess the situation. Make sure there actually is a situation. The results in one case are tragically sad, and then they're really angry. I like that the show delved into more of this one case, following and informing us of what did or didn't happen in the aftermath of that swatting incident. Now, the second case looks at a murder in Washington, D.C. that could have potential ties to the upcoming election, which was the 2016 presidential election at that time. Now, there's a ton of speculation that is examined here, and we go down some serious rabbit holes where it feels like the central case was being lost, which in reality, it kind of was when this was actually going on. Watching those that were involved manipulate the victim's family and then spread massive misinformation, it was just horrendous to watch. And what's even more infuriating is the lack of justice and consequences that are then shown for the perpetrators. And the perpetrators extend far past those that committed the initial crime of murder. The show looks at all of those that are complicit in twisting this tragedy for their sick own agendas. Now, because I loathe politics, this was a harder story to get involved with. But it's also very twisted in the storytelling, making it feel like it lost the plot several times through. The episode on sextortion was very similar to the information covered in that other Netflix documentary, Cyber Hell, exposing an internet horror, where random girls are threatened and then blackmailed into giving some unknown cyberstalker intimate photos of themselves. The interviews in this one are gut-wrenching and they're hard to watch, but for me, the thing that was most angering, and there was a lot that made me angry in this episode, but the thing that made my blood boil the most was hearing the resolution to the case at the end of the episode. Now, while it didn't dive into this, the story illustrates how laws need to change and adapt for emerging technology and then the crimes associated with them. So while watching these, if you haven't wanted to light the world on fire yet, the story that follows the white supremacist movement in America may have you reaching for the lighter. I love the perspective that we get as it's told from somebody who was drawn into the movement and then became a fairly influential voice within that particular area. And the fact that the story is coming from a woman was even more intriguing. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't female white supremacists, because I know there are, but typically when a story is being shared about these morally and mentally deficient mouth breathers, we typically only hear from the men. The footage that's shown in this story is harrowing and can be re-traumatizing as it follows just how the movement worked, how it grew, and then leading up to the tragedy in Charlottesville where that coward plowed into a group of people with their car. This episode had me thinking of many, many different ways to harm those that believe the white race is the best race. Now, I'm obviously not going to detail out my inner thoughts because I would get demonetized in a heartbeat and maybe even get the cops to show up. But the footage and audio that is captured is pretty damning. And it gives us a great look at the way these people really function. Not how they sanitize their thoughts so that they can get on the evening news and come across as some sort of level-headed thinker. Now, the final case was a huge change in tone from the previous 4. This one involves cybercrime, and there's this dude that's interviewed who's from Kentucky, and this guy put a huge smile on my face. Yeah, he's a criminal, and he doesn't even deny it, but his whole approach and demeanor is so matter-of-fact and wildly funny that it's hard not to be drawn to him. The story spans the final 2 episodes of the series, and I think it warrants the longer telling just because there's a ton of information that's being presented. There are interviews with the perpetrators, lawyers, legal representatives, journalists, and many branches of government agents, and they're detailing out the search for this guy who had figured out how to commit income tax fraud on a massive scale. Now, throughout the series, there are some reenactments, which I'm not typically a huge fan of, but in this final story, there are a ton of them. And while they do help to visually reinforce what's being said, they feel a bit cheesy and often even comical in spots. There's a cloak and dagger element to part of the events, but how it's played out in front of us is more like Keystone Cops, where it feels a bit more bumbling in the production. So overall, this is a wonderful documentary anthology series that you don't have to watch in any particular order. If you want something entertaining but not terribly heavy, then I'd watch The Last Story, which are episodes 5 and 6. But if you're ready to dive into heartbreak, frustration, and even injustice, start at the beginning and then power through. You might find yourself wanting to take a shower midway through though. The interviews are captured excellently so that they're both visually appealing but also emotionally engaging. And the pace of the storytelling is varied, making some of them feel much longer than they actually are. I think some of that also comes about just because not all of the stories themselves are straightforward, meaning they meander as the focus shifts from one priority to the next. I do think this is one of the better documentaries that I've seen in a while, but it's not one that I'm ever going to revisit. The content is pertinent and it's important for today, and it's told in an informative but digestible manner. And while it may turn your stomach with the content, it is worth the watch. There's no sex, some nudity, a ton of profanity and violence, including horrific descriptions of sexual abuse and news footage of heinous events. Now, as a reminder, I don't give rating to documentaries, but I do highly recommend checking out Web of Make-Believe, Death, Lies, and the Internet on Netflix. So what are you watching this week? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.